Hello? Whoa. All right, let's go. It's noon. No, it's 1 o'clock. And welcome to the IBHE board meeting, everybody. Board members, as I look at Sherry, and guests. I welcome all of you. We have a good crowd. I guess everybody wanted to come out to see IMSA. So let's call the meeting to order and ask our secretary to take the roll. Cindy?
Bombadek?
Present.
Bergman?
Present.
Coffee?
Present.
Cross?
Present.
Eagle? Present. Gossett?
Present.
Hayes?
Here.
Jacobs? Muir? Pieper?
Here.
Rivera? Russetti?
Here.
Thomas?
Present.
Weissman?
Here.
Zarnico?
Present.
Did we miss anybody? I'm just curious, is Mountain Dew now sponsoring IBHE meetings, Eric? I see those big Mountain Dew bottles.
Yes, they are.
Or is that Western Illinois sponsor of Mountain Dew?
This is mine.
What? It's yours? Well, it looks good there.
I have water.
Okay, well, I just didn't know. All right, we need to do a motion to allow Board Member Santos Rivera, who's unable to attend the board meeting due to business reasons. I need a motion, to have a motion from the board allowing him to attend our board meeting via conference call.
So moved. Second. Oh, sorry.
This is all scripted. We
We
got to
have to-
follow
we
the
have-
script. If
we
you
have
don't
to-
follow the script, you're in big trouble.
We have to cite Section 7 of the Open Meetings Law. So I move to allow Board Member Santos Rivera to attend our board meeting by a conference call pursuant to Section 7 of the Open Meetings Act.
That part wasn't scripted. She knew it off the top of her head. But the rest of it is scripted. All right, there's a second of that? Who's supposed to second it? All right, now there's no script on the second. All right, Jane, you're good. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No one's opposed? Good. All right. I want to thank, we all do want to thank the Math and Science Academy for having us. It's, I live about 5 miles from here, and this is a real high point and a real, I'm sorry, Santos, you all right? Hello? Can we put us on mute? All right. So it's just, this is a very, very impressive institution with impressive students, and I don't think the state of Illinois, or for that matter, maybe the country, appreciates some of the great things that have gone on and are going on here at the Math and Science Academy. And I want to thank them, and I also want to turn it over for a second to invite their president, Dr. Jose Torres, to welcome us. And he also, I think, does an incredible job here.
So I was raised to believe that no sacrifice is too great for our children's education. And while IMSA is a public institution, parents and students actually sacrifice 3 years of their lives early for students to come to a boarding school and for the parents to give their children away 3 years before they're ready to go to the next chapter of their life. So Chairman Cross, Secretary Director Baumann, IBHE Board of Directors, distinguished guests, good morning, and on behalf of the IMSA Board of Trustees, our faculty, our staff, our students, welcome to IMSA. IMSA is your institution. It's a public agency. It was established in 1985 by the General Assembly as a state agency and given 2 charges. One, to provide a unique, challenging education for students talented in mathematics and interested in mathematics and science. And number 2, to stimulate further excellence for Illinois schools in mathematics and science. We fulfill these 2 mandates through 3 different ways. One is the new STEM teaching models. We believe that we're a learning laboratory, and in fact, we're in the midst of a very incredible biology pilot this year. That I wish we were able to share more with you. But we have been extending problem-based learning and inquiry-based learning. And now we're fully involved in innovation, entrepreneurship, and tackling the world's problems. We've actually adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a framework to really help catalyze action among our bright students. We fulfill these mission statement, this mandates through residential education. Over 6,000 alum from almost 95 different counties in the state of Illinois have passed through our residence halls in grades 10 through 12, and they've gone on to really change the world in many ways and to advance the human condition. And then number three, we fulfill this legislative mandate through our student and educator program, where we help develop a STEM talent base through teacher training and STEM curricular development and student enrichment programs. Before I go on, it would not be Insight if you're not welcomed by students. So I'd like to pause and give one of our students, the student president council, Rebecca Schuin, an opportunity to welcome you, and then I'll conclude with some brief remarks. Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and it's an honor to speak in front of all of you today. When I first heard of IMSA, of course, the opportunities and the resources are what immediately jump out to you. The fact that you get to learn from is really amazing faculty, the fact that we have a student inquiry and research program, as well as numerous opportunities for internships, are of course the first things that kind of jump out to you. And when you first arrive, of course, you learn, and you learn through very torturous nights on your problem sets and your take-homes. But later on in your career, what I find for many, many IMSA students is that you learn a lot more from teaching. So as upperclassmen, of course, we are the charges and the leaders of, say, many of our clubs and extracurriculars, and we are responsible as students for teaching the new generation of underclassmen. We're responsible for tutoring them. We're responsible for our organizations continuing our visions past the 3 years that we're here. So, for example, when I first came here, of course, because of inquiry-based learning, I asked a lot of questions about our debate program, which was very new. It was only about 1 year old, and by working with Ben Cooper and talking more about like the Congress program and the PF program, we were able to expand and grow from what was nothing essentially to something much more now, where we go to nationals, where we have fun and we learn a lot more about public speaking and things like that. But more than just, say, the academic and the extracurricular learning that we do through teaching, we do a lot of learning from just having lots of diverse experiences. I sacrificed a lot of time that I spent at home with my parents and my siblings, with the trade-off that might be better, might be worse, I don't know, with a huge amount of diverse perspectives. So my VP is from Chicago Heights, and one of my favorite underclassmen in my wing is from St. Jacobs, which is a suburb around the St. Louis area. So there are so many new people that I never would have met, never would have talked to, never would have learned from their experiences had I not come here and lived with them and spoken with them. So I think IMSA has given me a lot of great opportunities academically and extracurricularly, but I'm most thankful for the community that it's built, and more importantly, kind of that spirit, that community spirit of teaching and becoming teachers when we're older as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
I violated my own rule of never speaking after an IMSA student, but here I am. Just a couple of notes that I want to share with you. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had preview day where almost 1,000 members of family members, parents, children come to IMSA for the day just to find out if IMSA is right for them. And so I often tell them that what sets IMSA apart is that we're inquiry-based, not test-based. We really focus on inquiry. What sets us apart is that we're really reading the future. What you heard Rebecca talk about, the student inquiry research. That means that 1 day out of the week, students don't go to formal classes. They're actually involved in research throughout the Chicagoland and also on campus. And now more through our affiliation with 1871 and our Into Center Innovation and Inquiry. We're doing internships with businesses and new startups. And finally, I like to tell our parents and our students who are interested in coming that we get you, that it's okay to be smart here. In fact, we want you to be smart here. You don't have to hide your intelligence and your smartness in a different setting. So it's accepted to be smart. I placed a document in front of you that, for the board, that includes our, what are called our return on investment. So it's an impact report. I'd like to just share with you two things from that. One is that our alum have been involved in leading foundation corporations that are well known throughout the United States. Some of them, for example, you might have heard of Facebook Messenger, PayPal, Netscape, YouTube, Yelp. Those all have a line ancestry to IMSA. Other alumni are quietly changing the world, including shining a light on global poverty as a senior economist in the Hanoi office of the World Bank, advancing human rights in developing nations as a legal advisor to the United Nations, unraveling the biology of complex diseases as an award-winning researcher at the University of Illinois, engineering the future of space exploration as a lead researcher for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and finally expanding our understanding of the universe while creating a buzz as potentially the next Einstein, whose research on black holes and the expanding universe is cited by the likes of Stephen Hawking. And that's one of our alum. We're very proud of our students. We're very proud of our alum, and I encourage you to also be proud of them. Just recently, we received the Chicago People's Award for Innovation by the Chicago Innovations Awards. That's their 13th or 14th year of existence. And so since I brought a student over, I wanted to leave you with a voice from parents as well. I received this email, this letter earlier today, this year in September, and I'd just like to read an excerpt from it. This mother said, Dr. Torres, I just want to take a moment to tell you how extremely thankful I am that our son, and by proxy our family, has the opportunity to be part of the IMSA family. When people ask me about why our son lives away from home, and I try to explain the amazing place that IMSA is, only a fraction, and often a small fraction, of the conversation focuses on math and science. I tell them about how well IMSA communicates with our family, about how I never question my son's safety because of the utmost level of care being taken when it comes to his well-being, and about how my son is growing as a human being, not just as a brain based because of IMSA. I have always believed that our son's intellectual abilities are a gift and are amazing. But more than that, I have always hoped and prayed that he would become the kind of person who uses the gift to make others' lives better. I love that IMSA not only talks the talks, but about wanting to improve the human condition, but also walks the walk. Thank you for all you do, and your institution and the institution that you lead are greatly needed and appreciated. I wanted to share that with you so that you could also be proud of IMSA because it is your institution, and we appreciate the support from Sherman Cross and the IDHE. Thank you. Have a great meeting.
Thanks for having us. Dr. Torres, you just hosted the 14th Annual International Science Fair, or you're going to? In June. Well, first in the United States here? Leave? I don't know. Did he leave? Okay. I think people don't always realize Aurora is the second largest city in the state, and the mayor was here, I think, to see Dr. Torres and you, Jack. Yeah, he's doing a good job. And also, she's not on the agenda, but we have two universities, two schools here in the Aurora area. One is Wabansie Community College. Dr. Sobek is in the back of the room. Welcome, and thanks for being here. We appreciate it. She's led Wabansie for a number of years, another, I think, an excellent institution. And, of course, Aurora University is just down the street. Dr. Sherrick, we held a board meeting there earlier in the year. So we have good institutions of learning here in the Aurora area. Very, very, very fortunate. With that, I want to turn it over in just a second to our new executive director. And I called Al Bowman in the interest of seeing if he had an interest in the executive director spot, and several people said, you can do it, but there's absolutely no way he'll do it. And I ended up calling him and said to him, would you you know, what are your thoughts? He said, let me get back to you. And within, I think, a day was Al, wasn't it?
Right.
Called me back and said, hey, I'm all in. I'd like to do this. And our board met and approved it. And I think it's the best thing that could have happened to higher ed in this state for a long, long time. Nothing against all the great higher ed people in the room. But Al is very committed. He's very bright. He knows the issues. He cares very much about higher ed and wants it to be very successful. And for all of those reasons, it's one of the best things that, in my mind. I think also it couldn't have made the staff of the IBHE any happier to have an executive director, finally. They worked pretty much on their own for about a year with my meddling a little bit, and Mark Jamil was very helpful in keeping everything running. But we needed somebody to take over as the executive director, and we couldn't have gotten anyone any better than Al Bowman. So, Al, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to you for some comments.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be part of IBHE. I was ready for a new challenge, and I'm looking forward to working not only with Tom, but with all of you. I've been in place since November the 1st, and I've had a chance to work with the staff, particularly the deputy directors at IBHE. And I will tell you that to a person, they are extremely capable. I've been impressed not only by their work products, but by their passion and commitment to the work of the agency. Also, Cindy, my assistant and the secretary of the board, is easily doing the job of 1.5 people, and she makes it look easy, so thank you very much. I've had a chance to talk to the governor twice in the last couple of weeks about higher education issues and some of the challenges that are facing our public institutions. He's very interested in what's happening in our sector, and he seemed very receptive to my opinions. I also had a chance to meet with the 12-member General Assembly Higher Education Working Group. We spent some time talking about the budget impasse, the impact that had on public universities in particular, and the need going forward for stable and predictable funding as we try to recover from both the enrollment declines as well as this troubling acceleration in our out-migration of students to neighboring states. While there are plenty of challenges to talk about, it's easy to overlook some of the performance indicators that reflect the good work being done at universities and community colleges. While tuition rates have certainly increased over the past decade, institutional aid, something we don't often talk about, which includes grants and discounts of tuition, has increased 158% for public universities and 106% for community colleges between 2005 and 2015. IBHE also did a recent study that compared what Illinois residents pay at neighboring Big 10 and Big 12 institutions and found that after discounting, Illinois residents actually pay less in-state at in-state institutions. And that study compared UIUC, UIC, ISU, University of Iowa, Missouri, Iowa State, Indiana University, and Purdue. And then finally, when you compare our graduation rates to our national peers, Illinois is among the nation's leaders in graduation rates for students who begin their studies at a public university, and in fact, we rank 8th in the nation. Lots more to talk about, but for now, thank you very much for asking me to serve this agency. I'm looking forward to a busy and productive year. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. You're gonna start to see some of those highlights that Al just articulated being promoted and talked about throughout the state in the coming months. So we're going to be getting out there in an aggressive way, trying to, I think as Larry Dietz at ISU talks about kind of the myth, debunking the myths and breaking that. And you just heard a little bit about him, and we're going to start that campaign the first of the year. So we're in a good spot with Dr. Bowman. Thank you, Al. I want to recognize at the advisory group table, I have absolutely no idea where it is. Or do we not have an advisory group table? All right. Well, I want to recognize Dr. Robert Gabriel, who's with the University of Phoenix, Chicago as the campus director. Is he here? All right, well, I guess maybe he was. And then also joining us today is Erin Fleshrin, the Student Advisory Committee Chair. She's a senior at McKendree University. Is she here? All right. Okay. Well, thank you for being here today. We welcome you. All right. And Dr. Sundberg was not going to have any remarks, so I didn't want anyone to think that we forgot her. We appreciate her being here on behalf of the community college presidents. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine Wiseman. We have had a task force meeting for a number of months now. Started out with what was the role of higher ed, or what is the role and function of the Board of Higher Ed that evolved into where we're going as a state in higher ed. And Chris has put, and as have her committee members, a great deal of time into this, and a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of thought. And I want to say thank you. And she's going to go over her report right now, but this evolved into a lot bigger task than initially we thought about. So, Christine, if you want to go ahead with your report.
Sure, and in turn, I want to thank the members of the task force who have been prodigious in their efforts to work with me, including staff from the governor's office and from the Harvard enterprise. So I want to thank everyone. What is contained in the materials is my fourth and final report that precedes the offer of a template for adoption and further consideration by IBHE staff. I think it important to note that at the conclusion of our last meeting on September 19th, the task force itself decided to form 3 subcommittees that would pursue the individual efforts and priorities that were important to the task force generally. One was higher education funding, the other was the career outcomes tool, and the third was to refine the goals and outcomes that had originally been offered to the IBHE last year in March. And I should note that the career outcomes tool has largely morphed into a project that is collaborative with the private universities, public universities, and with IDES. And so we did not pursue that, leaving it to the larger body. Higher education funding was left to the good auspices of Jay Bergman and Eric Lichtenberger from our board. They both presented their findings and a report on higher education funding, in particular performance-based funding, which we've adopted in Illinois at our last meeting. But I should note that there is likely to be a legislative task force that will include these 2 members that looks at the larger issue of higher education funding. That allowed us to consider the goals and outcomes that were preliminarily outlined and presented to the IBHE last June. What we did throughout this process, and I think we held at least 10 meetings, either by conference call or in person, was to look at the 2008 public agenda. We learned from our discussions with all of the states which had moved forward to prioritize goals that the IBHE is not in a position to supplant the goals of the public agenda, but to really work with them. And so we analyzed and dissected the public agenda, which identified, of course, a penultimate goal of 60 by 2025. That is, 60% of the population would have a higher education credential or some form of credential, higher ed credential by 2025. But there were 4 goals, 8 recommendations, 20 strategies, 81 action steps, and 38 different performance measures. Needless to say, when it is that amorphous and there is no real accountability for a lot of that, much of it has not been addressed. So we took a look at the 2008 public agenda in terms of goals, outcomes, and action items that would look to 4 component parts. Which of our IBHE goals would be associated with the public agenda goals and action steps? What's the status of each action step in the public agenda? Which public agenda action steps are relevant to IBHE in terms of IBHE control and contribution? I mean, there were many that we simply couldn't address at all. because they were not within our purview. And finally, which public agenda action steps are relevant to economic growth and workforce development. After an exhaustive analysis, we ended up with the template that has been presented to each of you and is a part of your board packets. You will see 3 columns identified. The leftmost column identifies the goals of the 2008 public agenda, and then it identifies our sub-goals for 2007-2018. Now, we had identified 6 goals early on. We reworked those goals to make them consonant with the goals of the public agenda. And so we ended up with 4 sub-goals. Reduce out-migration by improving regional competition, access, and affordability of Illinois universities. You are going to see that theme throughout these because we think the way of the future is regional development, you know, where public institutions, private institutions, proprietary institutions, community colleges within a given region all come together to look at the needs of the particular region in which they are located. We know, for example, that, you know, what works in the south side of Chicago doesn't necessarily work in Aurora. And so this is the wave of the future, and this is what other institutions are doing. The second sub-goal was to redefine the role, responsibility, and accountability for public funding of higher education. The third was to develop incentives for community college students and adults to attain degrees. And the fourth was to integrate the business community to create policy that offers the best education to the largest number of Illinois students. And finally, in the very last column, you see a series of action steps for IBHE to complete in 2018 or 2018-19 that are associated with each of those sub-goals and, by definition, with each of the 4 public agenda goals. And so I trust that everyone on the board has had an opportunity to look at that. Many of you have been involved in this work already. I'd like to ask whether there are any questions or whether any members of the task force would like to make any additional comments, and before I actually offer a motion to approve this.
Any questions, comments, observations? John?
Just one question. I look at item 3 of talking about developing incentives for community college students. To what expectations are on the community college board, or to what extent is that being coordinated with that agency?
Well, we haven't looked at that yet, but that's certainly, if you look at with the action steps, we talk about expanding the best practice of increasing reverse transfer agreements, and then IBHE utilizing the community college higher education regions. Obviously, what's expected there is that we will have to communicate. We will bring all of these different constituents together. That was our promise. Initially, when we started talking about this, it was the idea that we would work to formulate a template, but that the action plan for, you know, making sure that we can realize these action steps, and that the action steps would admit of measurable progress, will be left to the executive director and the IBHE staff. And that's part of my recommendation, that they will come up with a plan then for implementation. Thanks, John.
Tom, I have a couple of questions. Referring to goal number 2, how does this action plan make college more affordable for students?
Well, we already have an affordability action plan. And I guess I don't know what we can do to make it more affordable other than to work to implement a plan that takes that white paper into consideration and pulls the groups together. One of the action steps is actually that we have to do some advocacy with the legislature. I mean, it presumes that MAP funding will at least remain stable, and that there will be some stability to the funding of our public institutions. Yeah? Yeah.
Just to add to that, as a task force, it was important that, we stayed within the parameters that we had. So we had a structure, but I think that the comment is that affordability was one of the key principles, and that it was something we wanted to keep in mind so that we were not simply addressing a lot of the expectations and goals and objectives and desires without also retaining a pragmatic view of affordability. And so it was really a counterbalance to maintain affordability. And as Chris said, that really looks to assuring that MAP funding continues, that there are other ways in which we can assure that affordability is part of the expectation of excellence. Does
Yeah,
that make
I
sense?
think, Jack, we've already, we have that affordability action plan, which was pretty exhaustive. And I think this work simply builds on that. We certainly don't mean to supplant that. That's in existence, and everybody is working on that. And that's why that first sub-goal talks about improving competition access. And actually, the points that you've made in the past about competition access and affordability of public institutions, and looking at what can be done within the regions to make sure that Illinois students remain in Illinois and become productive members of the workforce is also included in that.
Thank you. And the other question
Yeah.
has to do for clarification. In terms of the IBHE being a conduit for the university appropriation, is it the same as it would be in the past, or is it, will the universities will still be able to advocate as we have always done?
Yeah, the idea there was to begin a conversation about the appropriate role for IBHE in governing the higher education sector. The concern was that there is no entity that is responsible for establishing statewide goals for higher education, and we thought it was an appropriate role for this organization. There's no intent to change the way dollars flow to institutions. Really, the intent is that this organization should be the organization that establishes those statewide goals. And we think that the current structure with individual governing boards for each local institution makes perfect sense. We think that's been a net positive. The 96 legislation, of course, changed the way appropriations flow, and I understand that. Whether we go back to that model or something else, I just want to start the conversation about what our appropriate role is. I don't have a vision for what it should be.
But I also think and we had a very, I thought, good conversation this morning with the presidents, and I think one of the things that came out of that was on this one alone, or in this one, talking about the need to do it in a collaborative manner.
Right.
And I think that would have to be part of the equation, so to speak.
If I can add one thing too, Jack, in all of our conversations with what has been successful in, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, each of them talked about bringing the universities together, but bringing them together in their own strength and individuality as well. I mean, not, creating one overriding mission necessarily, but working with the missions of the various institutions, because they each serve students sometimes in a different capacity. And so I think the idea in bringing them together collaboratively is to maintain that distinctiveness with respect to each institution as well. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the thinking. Obviously, when we thought about this, the idea was to come up with 4 sub-goals and action steps that were limited to what we could reasonably accomplish, and not to create too much, because actually that's what the 2008 public agenda does. It's just amorphous. It's all over the place. It creates so much that you end up with a situation where really nobody is accountable for it.
I understand that piece, but I guess my question has to do with, will it still be the same where institutions are able to, although the IBHE may set policies and procedures and those kinds of things, will the institutions be able to advocate for themselves and do that as we are doing now?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think it works otherwise.
Yeah, and I don't think there was an
As a
evidence.
member of the task force, I don't think, Jack, that we got down to that level of detail in our recommendations. These were higher level kinds of discussions. I certainly don't recall any decision that we would change the ability of individual institutions to advocate and seek approval for things that they think are in their best interest.
Yeah, and it wouldn't work. I mean, it frankly wouldn't work either.
Okay. Because my colleagues, they're not comfortable with that kind of thing. So that's the kind of discussions we've been having with the public institutions. I just want to make sure that's clear
Sure.
before I vote.
Thanks.
We see our advocacy role as one of advocating for a system and not replacing the ability of institutions to set their own local goals and advocate for those plans.
I'm not understanding the system part here. When you say more like advocating more of, I'm sorry, becoming more of a system, or?
Advocating for the higher education sector.
Okay.
So action item 2, you talked about the advocating for current performance-based funding. Have you guys as a task force discussed in detail what that will look like? Are we talking about, or are we insinuating that institutions will then be funded based solely off performance, and what are we defining that performance as? Are we talking about enrollment? Are we looking at retention? What are we looking at when we're looking at performance-based?
Christine, may I answer
Yeah.
that, as I was involved in that? We didn't get that far. What we did do is we talked to people by phone in 3 other states. I believe it was Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And 2 of the 3 of them provided us with some written information with respect to their performance funding. Eric Lichtenberger on our staff then kind of summarized that information, and we discussed it at a recent meeting that we had. We're, at this point, the Board of Higher Ed, or at least this committee, or this task force, are not advocating, well, we should do this, this, and this. We know that the legislature is very interested in performance-based funding, much more so than the system is now, which I believe is about 0.5%. But all we really got to was, okay, these are what other states are doing, and that's, like I said, that's really as far as we got.
Yeah, we're not capable of really doing that kind of analysis, and it won't reside with us anyhow. You know, the best we can do really is talk to the legislature and get the legislature to come up with a system that's probably more understandable and better able to be explained.
I think this is my final question. Is IBHE looking at being more, continuing to be a coordinating board or a governing board, based on what I'm hearing?
Coordinating board.
Okay.
We are both, actually, according to the statutes, because we do have to approve academic programs and things such as that. So we really do have two duties here.
But we're not administrative in that sense. In other words, we wouldn't be administering that. You know, we're a governing board. We can certainly set state policy, and that's what, you know, governing boards would do, but we're not an administrative board.
I think it means more regulatory.
Yeah,
than governing.
and that's a good distinction.
That's right.
More regulatory than governing.
How do you define regulatory?
Well, I would look to the statute.
Right.
And I would see the broad powers that the IBHE board enjoys in terms of certificates of approval, operating authority, I think those are all functions that the IBHE carries out as a regulator of higher ed.
I think it goes, if you go back to the original public agenda goal, to ensure college affordability, if we're going to ensure that college is affordable to those students, families, and taxpayers, somebody has to be advocating for the fiscal organization of how universities, higher ed is funded in the state of Illinois. So what the terms we came up with as part of the task force, I think the verb there is the most important, the first word, and that's to advocate, that we are indeed suggesting that the Illinois Board of Higher Ed become an advocate and a strong advocate with that the legislature take a look and review these, the current way we fund, and begin to look at multiple ways that we can bring more revenue to higher ed so that it can become more affordable. And I mean, I'm just reworked the words, but that's really what we're basically saying. And we're not, we're saying, and we will have, proponents of that, that it's now one of the major goals of the, if approved, will become one of the goals of the Illinois Board of Higher Ed.
And affordability requires predictability. I mean, nothing's affordable if universities don't know what's predictable, from year to year. So I think it all ties together. We recognize that there are limitations to what we can do. We can advocate, we can bring together legislative groups to work, but ultimately, it's going to be up to the legislature to allocate based on the information that we provide. Yeah.
I want to add that as a task force, and we met over many months, there was a real sensitivity to the dynamics of the role and trying to keep that balance of appropriateness within what is mandated legislatively by statute for the IBHE, what our goals should be. And I think that the issue of funding is such that, as we were looking at it, to be less, certainly more predictable, less arbitrary, more defined based on accountable measures and metrics. And that's up to another process to make those determinations. But I think that was really a great deal of what we discussed in the task force meetings. And I do want to add that to a fault, each person was extremely sensitive to assuring that the role was appropriate in any part of our discussions about this.
John?
Yeah.
Just one quick question, actually, now in the light of the conversation that we've just been having. The second bullet in the third column, second item, advocate to the legislature that the IBHE be the conduit for all university appropriations. Mm-hmm. I assume that doesn't mean MAP, but other than that this agency would be the determining body of SIU gets this and U of I gets this and ISU gets that. Is that what that means?
In my mind, it means a flow-through,
pass-through
system.
What would that gain if the legislature statically defines the appropriation anyway, aside of adding overhead at an agency level to process that?
I guess at some point in the future, if the legislature established different goals for different regions of the state, the IBHE would have the ability to begin to look at where appropriations flowed, depending on what the goals were of the state.
Yeah, well, no, as I said, my understanding today, we're doing this budget thing, we can provide that advice to the legislature now. Post-appropriation, it's all defined. What is us being the conduit gives us if we don't have a say in how that money is spent?
Well, I think it gives us, if we're a conduit, it gives us a greater say. We can bring the groups together to talk about this, and we can have perhaps greater influence with the legislature than we do now.
Well, and I'm not critiquing, I'm just trying to
Yeah, I
understand,
know.
right? I mean, if we could say, you get this dollar or you get this dollar, then yeah, people care a lot what we have to say.
Sure.
If the legislature says, thou shalt give ISU that dollar, it doesn't really much
No,
matter
I
what
don't,
we have to say.
I don't think that's the kind of authority we're looking at. That would denigrate the autonomy of the individual universities, and that's not what we're talking about. But look, if you're a conduit, you know, if you're an administrator of a university and you're the conduit for seeing things, you can look, you can see where there are some inequities, you can see where the balance might be different, and you can at least initiate the conversation, if with nobody else, with the constituents themselves.
I don't mean to prolong this conversation, but Christine, you mentioned conduit. I understand that, but then Al mentioned system. He keeps saying system. That I'm confused.
I don't know. We didn't necessarily talk about a system.
Yeah,
There's no system in here. You know, there's no system
I just wanted
contemplated.
Yeah,
clarification.
and it also comes under the context of affordability.
Right.
This is, in other words, ensuring that students can indeed attend school and have it affordable to them. So, I
You
mean,
know,
it's not the whole, it still comes under the context of,
Yeah, I guess my point, and I just clarify, my understanding could be wrong, but for the appropriation given to Western, you basically get it all lump sum, right? You submit one big, well,
We wish we got it.
Yeah.
you don't have to submit, you don't have to submit like appropriations or vouchers under different things. It's just, that's your approp, and you get it when you get it, right?
We do have to.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what the process is. I just assumed, here's your bucket of money,
Oh, I
and,
wish.
well, we'll
Yeah.
give it to you when we give it to you, but.
Not that way.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm asking, because it's, when I hear conduit, I think discretion, right? There is some say you have over the money, independent of what the appropriation says, and if that's the role, let's state that clearly. Let's not be ambiguous about it.
Well, and I think in the implementation, you know, the board can come together and work on that issue, work on perhaps a more precise definition that meets the needs of all of the constituencies and still allows IBHE to know what's going on. I mean, you know, that's part of the issue. And if you see some of the regulations that are coming and some of the amendments that are coming up, particularly with respect to data and who owns data, a lot of that is central to what IBHE is about. IBHE is the organization, not the legislature. You know, it's the organization that does represent the public universities and their interests.
Could I just maybe clarify something? We heard the terms conduit and system before. To me, they're not describing the same thing. When Dr. Bowman said we advocate for the system, what he means is to the general public, we advocate for higher education. We don't advocate for ISU. We don't advocate for Eastern or Western. We advocate for the entire system. When we're talking about a conduit, the way I understand it, this board has been a conduit for the 10 years I've been on here. The legislature will grant a certain amount of money, and when we get to the budget later today, we'll see that there's a list of grants. They will, that will be part of the legislation, and they will say, okay, Board of Higher Ed, you will give $2 million to this entity, $3 million to that entity. We've been a conduit for years. I don't know that we've generally had much discretion over who gets how much. I think it's been laid out, but, this gets back to the way the government works. I think we have to handle the paperwork. That may be why it's part of our thing. And also, we're the ones that go to the legislature and say, we would like this amount of grant money for these specific things. So I think when we're talking about conduit, at least that's the way that I look at it.
So we're voting on this entire thing, or can we do them separately?
Well, here's what we have. Here's my motion, that the Board of Higher Education adopt the proposed template, including sub-goals and action step, and secondly, authorize IBHE staff to propose a framework and timeline to the board consistent with the sub-goals and action steps as detailed on the attached document. So next steps, how those things get interpreted, how they are measured in terms of whether the action steps are fulfilled or not, that's up to this body in a different format, not up to the ad hoc task force.
Well, it may also be up to the General Assembly, or it might be up
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, they're all legitimately, they're very good questions, but this is a template, as Christine said. We're not going to wake up tomorrow and we're all going to have to follow this. There's some people that would like to follow all of it. Some of you might have some concerns, but this is a beginning. I like the fact that you have condensed it down from where it was out here, and it's a workable document. It may be it's a document that may, there'll need to be some input, and so you've got the IBHE's involvement in this. You've heard from Dr. Bowman that there's a working group at the General Assembly that will look, as much as they think they have all the good ideas, they may want some help from us, and this could be a document there'd be some things we can hand to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a working document. It's a starting point with a lot of thought given to it, and obviously there are things here that will need to be discussed in greater detail. And the fact that we've been able to spend a half hour on what conduit means that there's gonna have to be some talk about it. I mean, that's fine, that's fair, that's good, that's healthy. That's when I emphasized the word collaboration a little while ago. So,
Right.
but I think the point is, all of this work, this is a starting point. You have condensed it down to what we believe, if we vote for this, that are the big items that higher ed needs to focus on in the next couple of years, or at least the next year and longer.
I think the rubber hits the road when you come up
Yes.
with how you measure the fulfillment of those action steps. What does it mean, to be successful as a conduit? And when you come up with those measures and who's going to be responsible for them, I think that's the kind of detail that you're talking about. And we know that that's going to require further discussion.
Well, and what does integration with the business community into higher ed mean? How do you do that? Sherry Eagle I'm sure has one opinion. I know she does, and someone else may have another. But what does integration into the world of higher ed between business mean? So all of these are going to require a deeper dive with other parties, not just us, with more from the community colleges and from ISAC and the university presidents and the list goes on, and there'll be a lot of people that will want to weigh in. But it's a starting point.
Yeah.
It's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and that's the only way you can do it. You start with a larger, and then you work down.
And every one of these questions are good questions, I think. Al, anything you want to add before we do it?
I think so.
I second Chris's motion.
And I'm not being, do you have other questions?
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jack,
All right.
anything else?
Anyone else? All right. Again, thank you. This was not easy, and they put a lot of time into it. And when you want to make change and you're moving forward, there are going to be some difficult conversations, but that's okay. And this is a starting point. So, Chris, thanks for your leadership on this.
Mr. Krause, I want you to know that we all did it for the money.
You'll get your checks on the way out.
Yeah.
Just, they print money here at IMSA. Not many people know that. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? All right. How easy was that? I'm glad there were only 12, 10. All right, let's just get to an easier topic. Niall, you want to do the budget? I gotta fix my contact.
Okay, let's see if I can. Very good. Okay. Good afternoon. This is hopefully a quick review of our recommendations. Obviously, there is much more behind the decisions. They're difficult decisions to make. As always, we're glad to take questions as you have them, or at the end as you see fit. Note as we go along, every table and chart you see here is pulled directly from some part of the document. So if you have particular interest in knowing more or exploring more about those documents, then you can go back into the book and you'll see it described in more detail. We're going to go start with basically some review of some of the materials we had in the budget context in September. But we have updated with specifics we hope will strengthen our budget request in general. Because this is early, in the early slides are related largely to the budget impasse issues. I encourage you also to look at our particular statewide overview, which starts on page 68, the impact of the budget impasse and the danger of a new impasse. And specifically, I really do encourage you to look at the university individual stories that starts on page 81 of the budget document, because I think it adds a lot more context, a lot more depth. First, in the context paper, we had a slide that told a similar story about the decline in the amount of value of funding going to the operations of higher education. And this one is specific to just higher education, and it is specific to specifically our data updated to 2018. We start with 2002 because, as they say, who would have known that was the golden age? That was the year that we had the highest higher education appropriation for operations. But behind just that number decline, you see, which would be the blue columns, it's actually undercutting a little bit of erosion, like shore erosion, of inflation and also unfunded mandates, which we'll discuss in more detail. But by the time you've taken into account the regular cuts, the inflation, and those unfunded mandates, the value of the appropriations received for higher education operations in 2018 is only 52.9% of what they were in 2002 dollars. For universities, once you do that math, it comes out to 49%, and community colleges are a little better off just because they were not hit as bad by the unfunded mandates, and they're at 54.7%. Now, as difficult as that is, that doesn't take into account the 2016, basically a bite out of resources, which we'll discuss in a little more detail in a minute. Of course, the basic mission of higher education is to get people enrolled and to get them the education they need. So enrollment is a very key measure of what happened during the impasse. During the impasse, only two of our universities increased. It was University of Illinois Chicago, University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. If you were to look, it wasn't because they took, basically their trend line continued. They had the same trend line you would have seen before or after the impasse. It wasn't that they, at least on the paper, that they took students from elsewhere. The next one, which I kind of pull out here, is Illinois State, and they dropped by just 0.5% in undergraduate enrollment in those 2 years. If you were to look beyond their numbers, you'd probably say they likely would have grown if it weren't for the budget impasse. But the important number, the most critical number here, sorry, I should have moved on. What? It's only going one way. It goes, is it going? All right, hopefully. This 13.2% that the other 9 remaining universities lost in enrollment, and there is really no explanation for that other than the budget impasse of anything on a national level or anything on a state level. Community colleges, obviously, they didn't benefit. They also saw a decline, 7.5%, and even both sides of the private sector declined. So it wasn't that there was a rush within the state of Illinois to those sectors. So we know that what happened was either they went out of state, which of course is a great concern, or perhaps an even greater concern, which I think we hear less about so far, but is to what extent did students choose not to go to college at all? So it's one of those two things, neither of which, of course, is a positive. Based on what we've seen so far in enrollment information, if we have stability, there will probably be the chance to rebuild confidence in all sectors, even the private sector. Another major sign of the negative impact of the budget impasse was that real-world lingering impact on university bond ratings. prior to the impasse, every university that had a bond rating, and the Chicago State did not have a bond rating for us to compare with, but every university had what would be considered an investment grade bond rating. During the impasse, all the bond ratings for each university did fall. It was only a matter to what degree they fell. And during, after the impasse, only 2 universities, University of Illinois and Illinois State, retained what is considered an investment grade bond rating. So that's why I say the record was essentially perfect to about a 2 and 7 or 2 and 6, depending how you count, if you take out Chicago State. Since the budget impasse, the budget was passed, there has been some signs of an upgrade, so the expectation really realistically would be that a stable budget would help start to rebuild the confidence of the bonds, of the bond agencies and others. And of course, just to revisit what happened in 2016, the total of $1.2 billion less than was received in 2015. Public universities lost $852 million from what they would have received from the previous year, or in this case, as we know, in 2017, and then community colleges, $201 million. Obviously, no one could cut that kind of make that kind of cuts that quickly. It's just physically not possible, and also would have been, in terms of meeting your mission, quite unwise. Most of the reductions, of course, had to be pulled out of cash balances, which, like many businesses, that's what you need for the health of your organization, and that's what you need to move forward. That's what you need to educate students. So as we move on, kind of the base is the need for stable, dependable funding. That is critical. There really is strong justification for quite a significant increase of money, but we have to be realistic about the state's finances and the continued financial struggles as the state continues to have deficits it's running and will have to address in some way. Just quickly, this is what we will discuss. Each of the individual items we've boiled it down into. $254.4 million request, which is 7.9% more than is being received for 2018. Now, in this case, it does include the pension systems, which we'll get into, and that's an interesting discussion in itself. Probably the most important in the long run issue we can try to get across is that we need to have higher education maintain the buying power it has in 2018. It would be nice to have more, but that gets back to being realistic about how much money the state has. 31.4 million represents overall 2.23%, 1.9% for anticipated inflation, and the rest because of the unfunded mandate of the pension change. And that is particularly important, I think has been mentioned sometimes, is that is going to be something that balloons over the next few years. So we need to get that and start having that discussion. By itself, it's a very small number, but it is going to be a very large number in the out years. In the past, universities and community colleges have depended on the one main other source of income they can go to, which was tuition. But as tuitions have risen, so has price competition, and so particularly after the budget impasse has been the lure of out-of-state institutions. So that's really not such a realistic option anymore. We don't know to what extent that is drawing students away from Illinois, to what extent they are not going to college at all, but it's much less of an option than it perhaps was at one time. So buying power is particularly important. Another way I would put it is that if a flat budget is effectively another cut, death by 1,000 cuts, because you still have to deal with the inflation. Inflation doesn't go away. MAP, the request, similar to last year, is for $100 million. Just to review where MAP was at one time and what it buys now. In 2002, MAP covered 100% of university-weighted tuition and fees. This year it is 32%. It's part of the way that ISAC has dealt with this issue. It is up a great deal for community colleges this year to 66%, and that's one of the few places for the 2018 budget we can have a little bit of celebration. It's 13% for private colleges and universities. But another factor involved is that ISAC has only so much money, and it has only been able to cover 43.7% of the eligible applications, and it has to monitor and assess those applications. If it were fully funded, there might well be more applications they could receive. Well, as colleges have become more expensive and there are a higher proportion of lower income students, MAP becomes more important. And probably and particularly in this environment, if you're going to draw students back, MAP is one of those very rare things that is a very large project that can draw students specifically to Illinois. You're only going to be able to use this if you're going to Illinois. If you go to, okay, I went to Iowa State University. I couldn't have gotten it from being an Illinois student from Iowa State. Happens to be one of the
So Niall, this year's number was what?
401 million, and it would be 500.
You're asking for 100 million more. We're asking for, okay.
We're asking for 100 million more.
Thanks.
Naturally, this is also, therefore, an indirect benefit to colleges and universities to have a larger number for recruitment purposes and for financial reasons to have that.
And just for clarification, and I'm going to let you keep going, but I want to make sure we're all have a perspective on it. Last year, we requested a $100 million increase, and they ended up increasing about, was it 37 million, 35, 37?
Yeah, I believe the answer was 37.
37,
I
okay.
can double check, but yeah.
Off that 100. And ISAC's also of the opinion that we should, you're on the same page as us on 100 million more for MAP. Okay, sorry, now I just want to make sure that we kind of clean that up, if you don't mind.
So the 32% of tuition and fees is based on last year's MAP number, so the additional 100 million gets us to about, I don't know, 47, 48%.
Well, that's a choice. ISAC kind of makes its, and Eric can probably may want to say something more, but they have certain things to choose. How much in terms of going down and how many students to cover, what tuition to cover. So it's a choice. But here you can see, in each case, they're having to make difficult choices on either side of that. Number of students, amount covered, which of the sectors to deal with. So again, you have the actual expert here if you need any more detail. Okay. The next area that we've requested and have requested before is that universities and community colleges, well, basically ISAC have restored money for the National Guard and Veterans grants. There was a time when it was primarily funded through ISAC, and that was eventually done away with in 2012. And that mandate continues to fall on universities. In looking at this a little more closely, you can find some interesting facts. That, for instance, if you look in the book, I believe on page 21, you'll see that it's disproportionately a burden on some of those universities that have financially struggled the most and who lost the most in terms of enrollment. So funding back into an ISAC grant would probably help in a number of different ways, not just financially and not just like recognizing it as important function of the state. Another interesting thing about this, though, is that particularly the Veterans Grant, there's a federal grant, there's a federal opportunity for funding, too, for a large number of the veterans after the post 9/11 grant funding or award funding. And so students, veterans are using that more. So this has actually been a declining number. It's obviously still a substantial number, but it's a declining number. So whether this is useful to try to sell to the General Assembly or not, this is probably not a number that's going to grow, but it would allow universities and community colleges to more aggressively go out and feel good about financially to recruit veterans. And it would obviously be a boost to be able to say that they had done so.
And Niall, this was not in this year's budget. It hasn't been in for a number of years, and this would fully fund the needs for universities?
We believe it would fully fund, particularly if they were to put the two together. They've been.
Okay, all right, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. The last, well, not the last, I guess, the ISAC operations, ISAC has for many years depended on income from their loan servicing business to fund their operations, but that has been declining since 2010 when the federal government changed it to a direct loan system. And that has been declining at a more rapid rate. They also received a substantial cut in one of their most important fees. So the revenue they can depend on is down substantially. And in fact, to just a microcosm of just how much it's going to continue to go down is it'll be about a little under half, they estimated, for 2019 of what it was last year, 2017. So obviously that's a tremendous decrease in their opportunities. This is actually, they actually would be interested in $8 million, and so this is a piece of their request. So the last line here you see is for the outreach side. Is a second request. So actually there are a number of places where we've only taken part of what was requested, and this is just one that's specific and easy and important to know about.
I have a question, just on that, and maybe Eric could speak to that. Could you give me an example of some of the outreach programs that ISAC funds? Just.
So the outreach programs cover a number of things. One would be electronic tools that we have available on our website, student portal, the access to the electronic tools that we maintain for students.
For applicants.
Right. The big thing we have is the ISAC Core. Okay. So we have about 80 near-peer mentors. We hire recent college graduates on a 2-year program. They're deployed all over the state. We train them on college application process, college match, how to apply for financial aid, how to compare award letters. Our ISAC Core, they work in the different community college districts, so they're not tied to the community colleges, but we use that as the way to manage them.
Oh, okay.
Structurally to make sure that we have coverage all over the state.
Gotcha.
They work in high schools, they work in community organizations, they do FAFSA completion events, they work one-on-one with students. So that's really the big effort. The primary focus is for low-income, first-generation students and their families, and in particularly in under-resourced schools. So one of the things you find is that the schools where you have the least need, you have the greatest resources. So, higher-income districts tend to have more resources as far as counselors, college advice, but you also have more likely to have parents that have graduated from college, and you find that under-resourced school districts where there isn't a college-going culture, parents have not gone to college, it's less common for them to have counselors, or that the student load that they have, the ratio of students to counselors may be 1,000 to 1. So the ISAC Core is a big part of our college access and outreach effort. We also do training for high school counselors, college financial aid professionals. We do continuing professional education on financial aid, FAFSA completion as well as part of our outreach efforts.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
One just comment too to add to what Nigel said. So basically, this looks like we're asking for more money from the state. And we are, but it's a shifting, it's not so that we can do more, it's shifting federal money that's going away, being replaced with state money. So it doesn't allow us to do any additional work. It allows us to maintain the operations we already have. I would also note that over the last 10 or 12 years, on a comparable basis, our workforce has gone from over 550 people to under 200. So we've done 9 rounds of layoffs, workforce reductions. Our workforce is down by 60%. So we have done the things to reduce our costs, tighten things up, to try to minimize the burden on the state. But the reality is the state has had the luxury of the operations of ISAC being paid with federal money, and that luxury is going away as the FELP program continues to wind down.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
All right, let's go back and try to get kind of paint the big picture, Niall. So you've done ISAC, you've done MAP, you've done National Guard and Veterans. You want to go to, who do you have next, emergency capital?
Yes. Yeah, emergency capital is, the request is for $20 million. This is the same amount that was last year. We had an extensive discussion with the presidents and chancellors this morning. We understand that this is not an amount of money in capital that's going to go very far. It's almost more of a point, and it is more of an emergency to the General Assembly, more a point of being able to cover absolute emergencies, and there are various ways that might be done. I did note in something I came across that probably even the emergency items, the items we were most worried about, it'd probably be at least 2.5 times this amount. So this would not certainly even hit all the things that we think are emergencies, but $20 million in our hand is, particularly if they have to fund it out of GRF, is not a small amount. It would allow for some of the worst situations, and hopefully get the attention about how terribly needed it is. If there's a real capital bill, this wouldn't be so critical, but we really haven't had a real capital bill since except for the one spike in 2010, since about 2004. So there's an awful lot of buildup, which we discuss in various places in the budget documents.
There was a good discussion this morning between the presidents and primarily Dr. Bowman on how we try to figure out where the 20 million goes. There's you're the school with pipes about to go versus the school where the pipes have gone, and every year without a capital budget, this just gets worse and worse and worse. And 20 is low, but I don't know, I'm not sure how high we'd have to go, but the bottom line is we need a capital bill, and we're trying to address the most urgent needs on the emergency list. So we will be working, Al will be working with the university presidents on that, and also if and when there's ever a capital bill, trying to come up with the best approach on lists and where schools fit on their list with respect to their priorities for capital needs on their respective campuses. Thanks, Niall. What's next?
Just the last thing to note that we've got to $5.5 billion now in what universities and community colleges say is deferred maintenance. The university retirement systems request $67.8 billion or million, just seems like billion. And that is more than 100% actually, oh my gosh, what did I do there? That is more than 100% of that money goes actually to fund past liabilities, not current liabilities, because we have a certain discussion about high salaries and all this kind of thing. Actually, these are the normal costs that the state is going to bear. There's the employee portion, but the state has to bear, and that number you'll see is going down. The support for state employees currently is going down. The past liabilities, that ramp that Tom mentioned before, is going up and up and up. The current costs are actually going down. This year, past liabilities is 74.9% of the total amount. So not current liabilities, but past liabilities.
But just for those that are wondering about the issue of where money goes, operations, capital, et cetera, versus just money to SERS, that number, I think it's behind me, is 1.65 coming out of coming out of the state budget. It's a pretty, and that's just SERS. Yeah. That's just SERS. Just doesn't include the other 4 systems. So the number's astronomical.
Yeah, and that's not the largest system for sure. And then the last slide here is related back to capital, the real capital request. It's broken into 2 parts. The smaller, more maintenance-related is $475 million between community colleges, public universities, and IMSA, and a bit over $1 billion for regular capital. Let's should note, and we had a lot of discussion this morning, that this is at this point a particularly out-of-date system. We need to get back and to really look at this entire list, because with no budget for capital, the same projects have been on it, but during this time things have changed. And the final note is of interest. It seems like a whole lot of money, $1.5 billion, but The value of all our properties, the higher education properties, including IMSA and University Center of Lake County, is $26.3 billion. So this is really being an investment in keeping those facilities going. Universities, community colleges, having been hit so much by their operating budgets, certainly are struggling to maintain things even at the emergency level. So this is paying to continue to have access to such a large asset for the state. Okay, that is the review of the process. So,
But did you do operating? The operating side of it, I missed it.
oh, I mean like ours?
Yeah.
No, there's not something.
No, not ours. Not ours. What's
The universities and community college funding, I don't think that was.
that's what I'm talking about.
Well, that's all. In order for timing's sake, that's all in the maintenance. That's in that 31 point.
All right, but
million.
the number we're proposing for community colleges is 265 million.
I believe that's right.
265 million. That's what you did is you took the 18 budget of 259 million, increased it by an inflationary amount of 1.9%.
I think it's two. Yeah.
Almost two.
It's two point something because,
it?
because
Okay.
we're also taking into account
All right.
the pension.
So that's 265 million, plus or minus
Yeah,
a little more money.
And the universities, the total is $1,107,600,000.
And that is again taking the 18 number and increasing it by a couple percentage
Yes.
points.
I mean, individually, there's some items that don't get an increase because they weren't reduced or for some other reasons. But for the most part, yes. That.
All right, and then that I'm going to get you. So that, and we're going to have a conversation here in a second because we're on a different number than the 4 years. I think community colleges were where they want. They plugged in the same number as last year. So anything else you want to add before we open it up to questions?
No, ready.
Who wants to go first?
I can go.
Jack?
Yes. Well, I would just like to clarify my vote on this action before I cast it. The presidents of the Illinois Public Universities recognize the fiscal condition in which the state of Illinois is currently operating. And with that being said, the university presidents feel that they need to make a statement. We are good stewards of the state's dwindling resources. We play a large role in the economic development of the state and are an important part of the solution of growing the future of Illinois. Therefore, we have come together with a letter that I want to pass out to the
Please do.
Board members. And while she's passing that out, I'll go ahead and read it in lieu of time. Dear Dr. Bowman, the presidents of Illinois' public universities respectfully disagree with the Illinois Board of Higher Education proposed FY19 operating and capital budget recommendations. We recognize the financial plight of the state of Illinois, but attest that the IBHE recommendations place further burdens on public universities, which sustained reductions in FY18 following 2 years of financial calamity. The Illinois General Assembly's failure to pass budgets in a timely manner for fiscal years 2016 and 2017 severely hampered the ability of public universities to serve the needs of its students. The 2-year budget impasse cost public universities tens of millions of operational dollars, and the lack of capital funding forced institutions to cancel or dramatically cut back on necessary contraction and maintenance projects. Over the past several years, Illinois' public universities have cut costs while controlling tuition and fees. We have responded to criticism and have acted to keep the investment in an Illinois public university education affordable. The divestment in Illinois public higher education must stop now. The continued lack of support threatens to further erode confidence in the state and its institutions of higher learning. Collectively, our institutions are engines of economic development for the state of Illinois. We urge the IBHE to act as an advocate for Illinois public higher education. We ask that the Illinois Board of Higher Education recommend FY19 operation funding at the FY15 level, and further recommend a capital spending plan that reflects the urgent construction and maintenance needs of university infrastructures. Thank you for your consideration.
So, before we open it up, thank you for the letter. Let's make sure that it becomes a part of the record here for this board, and I want to make sure and everybody has it. We had a very healthy, constructive meeting, Al and I did, with the presidents beforehand, and had a lengthy conversation about what number should be submitted to the General Assembly and approved by this particular board. So I want to make sure you know that we have the numbers, so you have them. The 18 budget operations for higher ed was $1,083,000,083, if I'm correct. Niall, is that right?
That's the 18 is $1,083,000,000. Yeah.
Correct. The idea was to take work from 18, and that's what you're going to have before you, and increase it, take the inflation and factor that in, and that gets us to 1.107. All right? The 2015 number, I think, is approximately 1.2.
Yes.
Right.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure you have the numbers here. So, and I want to say that on that letter that you just read, I think I probably agree with about 99% of it, okay? All of what you guys did and ladies did as presidents to survive was masterful. They cut, they combined, they streamlined, lost faculty, they worked miracles, and they did incredible things. And I from afar, somewhat close up, watched, and I marveled at what they did. And the fact that they were able to do what they did speaks volumes about their leadership. They really did an incredible job. So I don't dispute any of that. So I just want to let you know how Dr. Bowman and Al and staff, how we got to this point. So we've got a discrepancy of about $100 million ballpark. You had at the same time an increase, a suggested increase in MAP of over 100, and then as you saw, about 30 million in National Guard and veterans. So that's the picture on the table. And then there's some more grant money, but compared to this, it's relatively small, though it's all big, all right? It's all important, but you just I want you to paint the picture. My belief as an agency and as somebody that who is a strong advocate for higher ed, but will be going in to see the 4 legislative leaders with Dr. Bowman and probably Dr. Dietz, not probably, with them in the legislative session, is to say to them, we recognize that we are in, and that you are in, as a state, very dire situation. Significant unpaid bills, you just raised taxes, debt into the billions, and that we are far from out of the mess we are in as a state. That this is going to be a long, slow road to get back into any condition of stability. And that we recognize that, and at the same time, we know that the universities have needs that haven't been met from a capital standpoint and operation standpoint. We want to be respectful of where you are, and we want to go to a number that's a bit higher than last year, not the 15 number, because you have a hard job to do, and you have to balance your budget, and we want to help you get there, because I believe, we talked about this, and this is nothing new to the presidents, not having a budget will be draconian for the world of higher ed this year, and for a lot of other social services, and the list goes on and on. So I think we have to recognize the situation we're in financially, the situation the General Assembly's in financially, and try to be, and not try, and be respectful of it and come in with an honest number. Doesn't mean we can't say that that we know that the universities need more money, but this is a way to help you get to where you want to get. So that's kind of the backdrop of where we are. Again, we had a very healthy meeting. We did not agree, and that's fine. And it's a little uncomfortable because I'm a big fan of all of what the university presidents have done and will continue to do, and I want to work with them. We just have a different opinion on what that number will be. So that's how it is. That's kind of the setup, if you will, and that's where we are. I hope I'm stating things accurately, I mean, and fairly. Al, anything you want to add to this conversation?
No, it's troubling to look at the financial condition of the state with billions of dollars in unpaid bills and the current budget between $1 and $3 billion out of balance. We're asking for an increase overall of $250 million, and I think just even getting to that modest increase will be very difficult in this environment.
I think the world has changed, and it's not good, and in the world. And one of the things that you can't lose sight of is, and that's one of the reasons the numbers have gone down, and it's awful, that pension number just continues to climb. And I'm cognizant of it maybe more than others because I chair the SERS board. And we had a very good investment year over the last year, and we're only funded at 44%, which is a little scary. And if the market dives, like some believe, we'll drop down maybe to the high 30s. But it's a pressure on the budget that's immense. So I need to quit talking, but I just wanted to try to lay it out. Larry, I don't want to put you on the spot. Did I lay it out kind of fairly to our conversation? I know we have a healthy disagreement. And part of this is a strategic decision. Some say, well, you ought to go high, and the General Assembly will come back low, and that's how it always happens. But I know that, again, when you have these conversations with the legislative leaders and the governor, if you can be blunt about it and say this is our bottom line, and this is where we need to be, and we didn't play that game, so to speak, where people elevate it. I don't mean to trivialize it. I think you have some credibility. So with that, have at it, Jay.
Well, I didn't know anything about this letter, and I didn't know anything about the thoughts of the university presidents. But when I first looked at this chart, which is now on page 13 of our books, I thought the same thing as I think the university presidents may be thinking. I realize that the university, or that the states are not in good financial shape. Our universities are not in good financial shape. So it kind of gets down to, where do we have a good argument when Tom and Al and Larry go and see members of the legislature? And I guess I differ with at least Tom and Al, that I think if they were to go in and say, we would like to keep funding at the 2015 amount because that's been looked at as the baseline, and we are not going to ask for an increase even though there is inflation since then, I think that we would have a darn good argument. And what else could happen is, whatever we ask for, and neither one of these I feel is unrealistic, but whatever we ask for, they may cut back anyway. If we go and ask for 2015 and they cut it a little bit, well, okay, they do. If we go out and ask for $100 million less and they cut it again, we're in worse shape. So my thoughts are, I think we have a very good argument. I would suggest that not only for the universities, but for the community colleges, we would ask for the same amount as 2015.
Well, the community colleges came in with the request to us as the same as last year. they didn't go back to 2015.
Well,
And I
I'd
think,
ask for it anyway.
well, let me ask you this. Who has told us that 2015 is the baseline? Is that something that that's written somewhere in the statute, or is that the perception of the higher ed community, or is that the perception of every legislator? Because as a general rule, most General Assembly appropriation processes work off the year before. And I think to jump to the conclusion that 2015 is the base might be erroneous. And again, this is, you guys do what you want as a board. Certainly, you're going to make that decision. But some might tell you that they want 2002 to be the base. And I think that I'm not sure that everybody in the General Assembly would agree with you that 2015 is the base. But go ahead.
No, well, I think I said what I wanted to say. I think that we have a very good argument. Maybe people argument of where the baseline is, but if we go in there and we say we would like the same amount as in FY 2019 as we had in FY 2015, even though there's been inflation for 4 years in there, because of the dire condition of the state, we're willing to, we understand that, and we're asking for the same amount. I think we have a very good argument there.
You know, my recollection is that they did something similar with MAP funding. And they go back to 2015 and that appropriation.
We actually got an increase in appropriation
Last year, but the year before, I think they went back. I think the idea was to keep it at the 2015 level. So there is.
Why don't we, hold on, Jane?
Mr. Chair, I think both sides have a very, very good argument. But realistically, the state doesn't have the money. And I would prefer to adopt the recommendation that has been made, knowing that it's not perfect, and in an ideal world, we would prefer that it be higher. But yes, I don't think there is any magic in 2015 versus any other year. So I'm not particularly persuaded that we should just go to that as a baseline. If we're talking about a $250 million increase over what was legislated last year, I think that that is a reasonable high-level request. And knowing that this is all in the context of the real reason, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but the real reason why we can't accommodate the increased needs in other places is the need to increase the SERS funding. And we have no control over that. It has to be paid. The Illinois Supreme Court has said repeatedly it has to be paid. So I am comfortable with the recommendation that has been made, even though I see the other side as well.
So just so, again, factually, so you know, the 08 number for operations for the 4 years was $1,083,000,000. This year's, the least thing, the proposed number is $1,107,000,000. So that's the approximate 2%. So I just want to.
Okay. Well, whatever.
Yeah, no, and I wasn't trying to.
Numbers I can't retain.
All right, I just didn't.
But the idea is, I'm comfortable with the recommendation that's been made.
All right.
I think it's realistic.
So, okay, is this working? Okay. So there's a few things. I think what is being said is that the 2015 is being used as a baseline primarily because that is the last year that we had a more stable budget prior to the impasse, right? And so we just looked at the budget and we're talking about all these reasons as to how capital needs to be increased and how this will only address 40% of maintenance issues. I'm currently going to a university right now that has substantial piping problems, maintenance problems, because we have been without a budget for so long. So when we're talking about the budget and we're looking at all of these items on the agenda of appropriations that cannot be funded, I don't see a legitimate reason why we can't go to the basic negotiating practices of you go in with your best, not your bottom line, and then if they reduce us further, then we can go from there. Yeah. But to go in initially with the bottom line, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense.
Well, here, it's a fair point, but what you have to think about is the optics of, to the public and to the members of the General Assembly with this, let's say today, for the sake of this discussion, we take the J approach and the university approach and say, all right, last year's budget was $1 billion. This year's budget's going to be $1.2 billion. And you're a member of the General Assembly and you say, don't they get it? Aren't they listening? Don't they realize that we just had one of the largest tax increases in the history of this state? We have billions of unpaid bills. We've got a lot of debt. And are they not listening to the reality of what's going on in the state? Now, we're talking the difference of $100 million here, and part of this is a strategic decision of how we do it. I think this board needs to maintain its credibility. And you lose it if you're not cognizant of the financial situation of the state of Illinois. Nothing that we caused, nothing that the university presidents caused at all, or students, or parents. But it's the reality of the situation. And I think if we have credibility and are respectful of the situation, it helps us short term and it helps us long term. That's my thought on it. And I feel pretty strongly about it.
I just keep thinking about how we just looked at the line items and we talked about us being a conduit and advocate for universities. If we're supposed to be advocating for universities and universities presidents, how are we really advocating on their behalf if we're going in there strategic, thinking that us advocating is affecting our credibility? If anything, I would think that would increase our credibility because we're actually...
All right, well, you can be an advocate and not have success, or you can be an advocate and have success. And if you have credibility, you can be an advocate, I think, and have a greater chance of success. And you are merely recognizing and saying to them, look, this is the situation. Now, let's add this to the table. You want $5 billion in capital needs, right? That's what would need, and that's what we need. If I remember correctly from my days in the General Assembly math, it's not even General Assembly days, for every billion in borrowing, you need about $100 million a year in a revenue stream, ballpark, if I'm not mistaken, right? Is that up or down?
Sounds reasonable.
Reasonable, all right. So let's say we decide to do a capital bill. That means we got to find a revenue stream another $500 million just to meet the capital needs on top of this. So and we need capital. We know we need capital. Yeah. So even if we do a $2 billion or $3 billion capital bill, we got to find a revenue stream that'll take care of that debt service. I know, is that over 20 years, Niall, that $100 million?
Well, it depends. They do it various times, but yes,
and
that's pretty common.
I'm sure the interest rates are great right now for us.
Well,
but anyway, they're more pressures is all I'm saying. So, but I don't mean to cut you off.
You're
you're asking very good questions, and there's a balance about, you know, let's start with the premise that we're advocating for a board of for higher ed. I feel very strongly about that too. It's just this to me is more of a strategic call. Sherilyn.
You know, after sitting on the task force for several months and listening to the other states, especially Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, one of the commonalities they had was that the state legislature spoke of their unwavering support of higher education. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. And so I feel more supportive of asking for the 2015 budget. And again, I agree. I think it was a non-official baseline because it was before the budget impasse. But the fact is that higher education has to become a significant priority. The legislature is going to do whatever they choose to do, and they will cut to whatever level they wish to cut. But I did have a technical question that I wanted to ask that might have an impact on this because it relates to about $30 million. Could you explain to me again the issue of the GI Bill versus the mandate for the state? And is it am I correct in understanding that the state waiver comes before the use of the GI Bill? And I'm wondering if that has any element of utilization.
Yeah, I could answer, but I think you have probably better people who are more, you may
and
have
I don't want
an
an elaborate answer. I don't want to belabor this, but I do feel supportive of the $1.5 billion, the 2015 budget, because it's a policy statement. And I did look, though, and still am a bit confused about the GI Bill and the state mandate, and that's about either 30. It's $30 million.
Between the two, it's also
20
it's
or,
also
you know,
the
20 million on the
the National Guard. But
yeah, and the National Guard.
I'll try to do
I
it
don't know.
quickly, and then if it needs to be clarified, Eric or somebody else can
Right.
clarify that veterans, certain veterans have access to both, and the rules applying are different on whether you can go to graduate school. Sometimes you can use it outside of Illinois, and so on. So they choose which seems to be most appropriate to them, and they have increasingly been choosing to go towards the federal one. So that's the point. If there are still a lot of students who use the state one, but if you had this and could benefit either way, there would be a good reason to go and recruit veterans.
So I asked Mr. Cross, is that a third rail, or is that something that we should have any conversation about?
I'm sorry, what part?
On the right now, it's up to the individual to choose if they. I think that's what I'm paraphrasing, to choose whether they use the GI Bill or the state mandated waiver of tuition. If we could mandate that they use the GI Bill, would that not capture some of the monies that we might be trying to put back into universities?
That would require a legislative change, I think.
Yeah.
It would require a legislative change, and there have been discussions in the legislature in past years of requiring them to use GI Bill benefits first. Those discussions have not proceeded beyond a discussion standpoint.
And I'm a veteran, Sherilyn, so I can tell you how it works. So the IVG is a state grant for veterans. So in order to utilize it, you have to have joined the military from the state of Illinois in order to use it. Post 9 is only eligible to veterans who have gotten out on an honorable discharge, and they are entitled to their education benefits, but they also receive a stipend with the Post 9. So like an extra lump sum of money, you can say. With the IVG is only eligible to be used at a public institution, where Post 9 can be used at either private, community college. So for a veteran who may be in a financial state, they will utilize the Post 9 first if they are eligible for it, because they want the extra money so that they don't have to work and go to school.
Sure. I mean, I don't really want to question the processes of it, but I am just bringing up the fact that if we are at a new day, and if we are looking for other ways to assure that the public policy is that we are supportive of public education, higher education, I'm just throwing that out. And I understand it needs a legislative approval, but I'm just throwing out, rather than simply saying I am supportive of a 2015 budget request, I'm also looking at, are there any ways in which we can help that process through changes, whatever those changes might be?
I would just comment on the ING-IVG as well. At least from an ISAC perspective, we as a policy matter have not been in favor of requiring the veteran to use one versus the other, that it's really the veteran's choice. And our view of that has been that they earn this benefit by serving our country. And there may be different reasons why it's better for them to use ING, IVG, or post 9/11 benefits, depending on their own personal circumstances. And one of that is that post 9/11 benefits can be transferred to a dependent. So some veterans may choose to use ING, IVG rather than their post 9/11 benefits because they want to transfer those to one of their dependents. So at least from a ISAC perspective, we've supported student choice and their ability to choose on that front. Just, I'd make, if I could, one comment too about the budget from an ISAC perspective. Obviously, we're great, hugely supportive and appreciative of, asking for a $100 million increase in MAP. We do think that that's critical to help support low-income first-generation students, support the goals in Illinois, not only 60% by 2025, but the reduction of achievement gaps. I would note, though, that I do have a commission board, and my board has approved a budget request for ISAC that included, funding for the outreach side, as well as some smaller increases in some of our other gift assistance programs, including the line of duty grants. So these are the grants for dependents of police officers, firefighters, correctional officers killed or disabled in the line of duty. So in the end, I will be supportive of the budget, that the determination is made, but I do want to note that from an ISAC perspective, we will be advocating for what our commission board has approved with the Governor's Office of Management budget and our, legislative testimony that we'll do at the General Assembly. So, as an IBHE board member, I'll support what the board, ultimately does, but as an ISAC, as the head of ISAC, I need to support what my commission board has approved. So I just want to make that clear to people.
Yeah, I think too, just now, Christine, you go next, but I want to make clear, I'm not sure in all the numbers we've thrown around today, that this budget request is 130 million. I mean, the difference between 15 and this year on operations is about $100 million. This budget, when you couple the MAP increase of 100 million and the 30 million for veterans and National Guard, it goes up 130. So I'm not sure, again, that all got translated, but Christine, go ahead.
Well, I
Or
will
John,
defer to
were you ahead of me?
John
I'm sorry.
first.
Yeah. Do you remember off the top of your head when the tax increase was passed?
Do I?
I'm trying to
forget it.
Well, yeah, you're going to remember it one way or the other. So, okay, then this doesn't account for that. Okay, I was looking at COGFA revenue estimates to inform my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know.
So the capital request you have for just this next fiscal year is $5 billion, not the 1.5.
Well, it's 1.5.
Well, that's our ask.
Yeah.
The university president's ask is 5 because I thought that was.
Needs are about, I think, 5.5.
Niall? The deferred maintenance is 5.5.
Well, I see the 26.3 on the slide up there.
It is the what? Is the 1.5? No, the what? Which are you looking at here?
Well, no, the bottom line question is the 100 million increase or the 100 million difference you guys want, I think is the smaller number here. What's the capital spending plan that you're asking for?
The capital, this is the 1.5 billion. Is
university presidents, not us.
What's the question?
Well,
second to last paragraph, we asked that IBHD and further recommend a capital spending plan that reflects urgent construction and maintenance needs of university infrastructures. Do you have a dollar amount that you
They did
are
have a
looking
dollar
for?
amount. I don't
Well, yeah,
even-
no,
I don't
it's
recall
their
what it
letter,
is.
so, I mean, that's,
Well, I don't think they included that on.
well, no, I know,
We
that's,
didn't have a dollar amount.
Yeah, I might be able to find it, but I don't have it with me.
They had proposed a 20 million.
well, that was the emergency one, but then I also saw 1.5 billion.
Yeah,
in
1.5, I mean, I think
That-
your point is just like our request isn't all
yeah.
that was requested, you're right, there is a much longer list. I don't have that
I
number.
see
But
his
it is,
capital
it
request
is likely maybe, if it's twice this, I wouldn't be surprised, I don't remember what the number is.
No, I just wanted to know,
It's
like,
like-
what's the
It's
ask?
like 2.6 or something.
Yeah, IBHE, we're putting in 1.5 to the General
Yes.
Assembly, right?
Yeah.
What would the university presidents like different on that number?
And their
'Cause that-
list
that's
of
big-
needs,
that's
which is,
big money.
their list of needs is indeed much larger.
Oh,
That's
no, I see
absolutely.
26 billion right there.
Well, 26 billion is the value of replacement cost.
But
I mean, if
John
you
asked,
set
John
the
is
bill-
asking a simple question. If they want 2015, we know in operations that's $1.2 billion. What would be, so you could plug that into the letter, what's the capital number that you want to plug in there?
Yeah, and we do have that, if we can go through the ramp
Right,
and
if
we
we
can get
go-
we can get a collective number. I think we actually have done it already.
Well, what we submitted, I think, in what, is it 2015? Where we've submitted in 2015? I don't have that number, but we can plug that number in
Yeah.
if that's what you're saying.
Well, I'm just like curious what the number is,
you're at-
what the ask
It
is.
is humongous.
Oh, I'm
We
sure
have
that-
not had a capital project.
Ergo why I
budget
want to
in
focus
years.
on that
Yes,
number and
yes.
not
Well-
100 million, right? I want to focus on the one with the B.
Yeah, but, I mean, see here, this includes community colleges, but it's 5.5 is just
Yeah,
the
that's a
deferred
rounding error
maintenance.
on life safety needs, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
No, and
this is a
I get why that's
closer,
not
this is
sufficient.
a closer approximation to what the true need is at this point after so many years of neglect.
So.
I mean, that's kind of what this does
okay.
represent.
So you're looking at 5 billion and change, including
Yes.
community colleges.
Yeah, because the other one doesn't include community colleges, by the way, and they do have a separate request.
Why is not doing 1.5 in the next fiscal year and then coming back for more in future fiscal years not viable? or is it not?
Well, if it can't, well,
Well,
the University of
that's-
Bergen could speak too, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's who I'm directing the question to. I mean,
Yeah.
no, yeah, I know, that's come and gone, but I mean, we're putting in 1.5 of a billion capital request. Is that sufficient as a down payment to go back in a future year?
Well, yeah, I
Well,
mean, I would say, when I was talking to CDB, they particularly said, they think it's like the 7-year locust. It's been 10 years, so obviously we're going to have a new one.
Well, all we could do is ask for it,
so
right? What do you want us to advocate for capital spending?
I didn't take too much.
Well, we always advocate for it, but we never get anything.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, no, that's given, but, you know, if I'm talking to Senator Bennett, he says, okay, how much do you want in capital if I could make money grow off of trees? What number do I tell him?
Right, we can get the 2015 figure.
Like I say,
And we
like
can
I
add
said, I
up.
wish the revenue estimates
We can add up the
included difference
total.
in
Well, in
taxes.
fact, I'm pretty sure I did. I just don't remember off the top of my head that from RAMP, the total that the universities have put together. And we can provide it to them and as needed. They say it's closer to this number.
Yeah, well,
Good question.
Well, I think it's difficult without knowing what the capital expenditure would be. But I have to say, I would be persuaded to support the 2015 threshold. And I say it for this reason. I've worked with legislators in 3 different states, and I've also been a member of a board which has asked for money in those states. And my responsibility, and I feel it pretty strongly, especially having come up with the new list of priorities for which we expect buy-in from our constituencies, is my fiduciary responsibility is not to do the job of the legislature. The legislature is going to allocate money the way it sees fit, depending on who approaches it. I can't know that. I can't know who's going to come at them, and I don't think my credibility depends on the amount I ask, so long as it is a principled amount and it has a basis in fact. There are 2 public issues that have been, talked about ad nauseum through this state in the last 2 years. One is pension funding, and the other is higher education. I mean, I think coming in with a request, and I don't know about the capital appropriation, I can't speak to that, and I don't know what that question does to this recommendation. But I cannot think that the legislature would be surprised by a request to come in at 2015 spending or the appropriation for the public institutions which have been hit hard. They've been out there talking about it ad nauseum. They've been in the papers as much as we have been in the papers about it. I think it's the legislature's job to look at all of the needs across the state and decide who gets what. And I don't think we lose credibility by advocating on a principled basis what is necessary for our institutions to do the job they have to do.
You said, but overall, holding back, but I should mention that from my long history with the finance issues, in perspective, on a normal year, it's between 700 million, 500 million and 700 million. I know, Tom, that you have another, in total, in terms of new revenue that's doled out to everything. So this year, depending upon how you count it, it actually may be a negative number. Because we are in deficit. So 300, if you add for the community colleges, I come up to $113 million if you were to go back to the, if you did just them, then there's some other small pieces you could also add, but 113 million, it would come up to 367 million, which would be about potentially, even in a good year, about half of the total that the state would have for things. And so that's, I think, kind of in the back of the head. That's what when I hear the chairman speak, I think of all the pressures they have.
You said a number, I want to clarify, 500 to 700 million revenue difference for next year?
That's a common kind of number for the additional revenue you have in a new year, but in this coming year.
But that's not, so not based on the tax increase?
No.
No, just in
Okay, yeah, no, I like that.
economic growth.
No,
Economic growth,
I guess
yeah.
that's the numbers I'm looking
That's
at.
a common average kind of kind of number do you have in perspective of what either 254 million or 367 million? That's kind of the compare to the total that the state has, to get an idea.
Sherry?
I guess my questioning was going, again, back to, I never like to look back and say, well, we'd like to go back to the 2015. There's obviously to me, the rationalization for that is that there was consistency of, you had an expectation of what you were going to propose, and there was a feeling that you were going to get it. And also, in addition, when you look at, like, for example, bond ratings, the bond ratings stayed high, and you were able to institutions were able to go into debt and actually also offset some of the need for capital issues. So, but I'm sorry, but at the same time, I guess if we're looking for consistency, and the sense of urgency that we need to go back to the figures of 2015 versus what's being proposed, I guess I would ask back, in return, are we also going to ensure to the state that enrollments will rise, bond ratings will go up, more students, there will be more affordability, there will be more incentives for degree completion? I mean, I think if what we're, because there's got to be an understanding, and maybe you can't, the time is past for just asking for dollars without, and this is what you're going to get. I mean, I know we're starting this campaign to dispel issues that are non-truths in education right now in higher ed, but the fact of the matter is the campaign isn't as loud as it should be right now. So I guess paring back the discussion of budget versus assurances, and I know assurances are hard to make, but right now so is giving money. Is there a strong belief that you're going, with this small amount of difference in fiscal requests, that indeed things are going to change, and that the bond ratings will go up, and more incentives will be there, and enrollments will go up? That's my question.
Well, anybody have an answer to that?
Well, that's the legislature's job.
What are we?
We're not the legislature.
We're the
I'm not an arm of the legislature.
We're conduit.
Well, we're,
at least I didn't think of it.
I think we're the advocates, and what are we saying?
We are, but if we're advocating, we're not them.
In just a second, does anybody have an answer to Sherry? Anybody?
Yes, he did. No, this is in 15, but this is the request for this year.
How much of any more if they give us the same amount as they did 4 years ago? I mean, our backs are already up against the wall.
Oh, it was the same. Oh, yeah.
Well, then,
You know,
that's,
they want to give us 10%.
I'm coming. I hear you.
This question is how much
Then we
is
can
that?
promise what we're going to do with the extra money.
So obviously, each of these cases, it's some small portion of the.
If you give us 2015 funding, we'll do all this extra stuff. But I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think that's an argument we can use.
So, you know, the one issue that Sherry just brought up in regards to the bond funding, I do want to address that. I think a lot of the issues of the downgrade of the bonds was related to the state of
We can't hear.
One of the primary issues that, as you are addressing in regards to the bond issues and the downgrading of the universities, had to do with, in significant part, to the state of Illinois and its financial situation and the credibility of the state funding. And that was one of the primary causes of some of the downgrading. But other than that, what I really am looking at this as less of a fiscal negotiation and rather a determination of public policy and as it relates to higher education. And I think that by saying that we just want to go back to me that's rather reasonable. We just want to go back to the year in which we had full funding and before the budget impasse. And some of the things that we are talking about, I agree with Sherry in terms of accountability. And so I hope we do have more significant metrics and more significant accountability, and that we don't shy from that. And that can be part of perhaps the discussion. But I think this is really not so much a numerical conversation as it is a policy statement, and I think that's really the issue at hand.
So if we did the 15 number, and then we all happen to be here next year, we're just going to stay at 15 because that's the number that that we really like, and that'll take care of all the needs of higher ed, and then we'll be done?
No, I don't think,
Well,
absolutely
then,
not.
because here's how members of the General Assembly think, and this will sound harsh, and I'll make some people unhappy, and I don't know that I necessarily believe it. In fact, I know I don't. But members of the General Assembly don't believe that folks ever can have enough money, and that people continue to come back year in, year out, asking for more, and that there will never, ever be enough. And that's the struggle I'm having with this, not because I believe that, because again, I think we're in a little different situation because of what happened for 2 years. But that's how members of the General Assembly think. They go, I'll tell you right now, K through 12, they just had the whole funding issue. Everyone thinks it's better. We'll be back, not we, the General Assembly will be back because people will be coming in saying, we need more money. We need more money. We need more money. Again, they're not analogous situations. I'm just trying to tell you how legislators think. And why I worry about credibility, Christine, is we now are going to have to go before a working group, or Al is, or I am, or you, someone from this task force, and go and try to sell all this. And they're all good things. They make a lot of sense, and I think they do correlate to funding. And I think to Sherry's point, if you could say we can take these things and get these done in exchange for more funding or how it's done, I think you have your credibility. When you just come in and say, give us back to 15 because that's where it was, that was the baseline, without any support for it, it causes you as an agency and as members of it to lose your credibility. I'm just trying to, again, I'm not editorializing, I'm trying to tell you how I think members think.
I like that. With all due respect, Chair, I don't think that when we're asking for the 2015 budget, I don't think it's just because we're using that as a baseline. We've went through the budget impasse and this current year's recommendation, and we've clearly stated that there needs to be more funding for capital, there needs to be more funding for infrastructure, for maintenance, and for several other issues. And we've also addressed that this $100 million is just $100 million. So I don't think that our worries about what the General Assembly are going to think should affect how we choose to advocate for our public universities and our presidents.
You can advocate for universities and be responsible in your ask. And I would caution you to just say it's just $100 million. You got to be a little careful with when you say.
Oh, no. That was
Yeah, but that's how people think, and that gets us all in trouble as a board. $100 million is a lot of money. John?
The $1.5 billion capital ask, did you ask for any funding stream for that?
No, that's supposed that in theory that Tom talked about that. $1 billion means how much that translates into. It's meant to be as a capital bill. By the way, it was pointed out to me. Actually, I even compiled this, so I should have remembered. If you look on page 53, actually, it does have the request specifically that they requested. It's $3.6 billion. So it's about 236% of the 1.5. As we've mentioned, the 1.5 is actually based on pretty old stuff, although almost none of it has actually been addressed. It's just all grown.
It's fair. It's a working number, and that would be about $150 million in a revenue stream over 20 years?
A year. It's 100 to 150 to satisfy $1 billion in bonds.
Yeah.
Ballpark.
Well, yeah, let's call it 150, right?
It depends. It depends on the bond rating. And
Yes,
the state's bond rating, as you know, isn't very good either.
I'm doing napkin math based on the last, COGFA estimate.
Well, that's how they're going to do the. That's how they're going to do the budget.
Well, there's probably actually more math involved here, but
Maybe so.
Based on if we add in the $100 million revenue stream for that, we would be at $50 million over our proportional share of GRF today.
Plus the 130 with MAP and.
No,
you got MAP in there?
Well, of course, if they pass.
Even with the tax increase, right, and that's just assuming the tax increase just goes straight to GRF lines, and it's not, right? And that also assumes K-12 stays
flat
Yeah.
from last year to this year, and that would surprise the ever-living whatever out of me, that somehow that could ever manage to happen.
Yeah.
Right, is that we're asking, the ask would be going in, okay, where are we asking them to cut, right? Is it K-12, we take another 50 million out of K-12, we take it out of healthcare, we take it out of environment,
Social services.
we don't
Yeah.
spend any money on the environment here in Illinois, never mind, we're not taking it out of there. Public service, right, you know, economic development, right? I mean, it's a zero-sum game. Either we're asking them to hike taxes again, or find revenue somewhere, or cut somewhere else, right? And I know, as somebody who ran for office and had conversations like that, and Tom was a legislator having conversations, it's a zero-sum game there, where if you're saying, I want a bigger slice of the pie, right? You know, the one question I ask is, okay, I give you an extra $100 million. What am I going to see for that $100 million compared to what I see this year? Not from 2015, because that's 3 years ago, 2 years ago, right? What am I going to see different, right? And like I said, I think then that goes to credibility. If we can answer that question, say, okay, if you give the public's 1.2 instead of 1.1, they will, I don't even know what difference would be, you know, hire back faculty and bring down student-teacher ratios. Okay, that's something, right? That interests me. To maintain status quo, I think that's going to be a hard sell. I mean, I'm not saying do or don't, but I mean, it is a strategic decision, right? And at a certain point, you know, everybody always asks for more.
Right.
If you come in and say, hey,
I'm
we'd
gonna-
like more,
Darlene?
but we can work in this, it helps your case.
All right, Darlene.
So I just want to say this. I'm working with K-12 right now, and we're talking about the tax freeze, okay, and the possibility of a tax freeze. And we have both sides of the aisle coming to us and presenting unanimously they would like to see a tax freeze. So in the conversations with our superintendents and others, people are forgetting that there are taxpayers out there. In our general assembly are not only accountable to the colleges and universities, just as we are accountable, but we are also accountable to the taxpayers. And we have a lot of taxpayers out there, as both our Republican legislators and Democrat legislators are saying. What they're hearing is that, you know what, we're being taxed to death. Our public education is no longer free. There's no such thing as free public education anymore. Our colleges and universities they can't afford our colleges and universities. And I'm just saying too, in all of this conversation, there is another piece of the pie here. And again, when we talk about credibility, there is credibility. We have to establish greater credibility with our taxpayers. Those are the people at the end of the day that we also are accountable to as well. So you know what I want, I mean, you know, as Tom had said, you know, higher education is absolutely critical to the future of our children, to the state, to this nation. But what can we do to help to kind of balance and blend this so that there is greater credibility, so that our relationships are stronger both stronger with our legislators and stronger with our taxpayers as well too. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have a strong voice in this as well. And I think that's what a lot of what our legislators have to listen to as well too, not just us.
All right, anyone else?
I just want to clarify my comments. First of all, I appreciate where the chairman's coming from a sense of pragmatism, and that's very important on the part of this board. I also want to be very clear that my comments in regards to looking at a 2015 budget did not go without accountability. So I agreed with Sherry, other than the issue of the bonds, that if we, regardless of the amount of money, we are at a point in time right now where higher education has to be accountable and has to identify through metrics how we can respond to the taxpayers in understandable language that we have achieved identified goals. So I just wanted to clarify my position. It wasn't just, let's go back and get a bunch of money, but rather to say, I really do believe we are at the time, and it doesn't even matter what the budget is. We are at the time where we have to be accountable, we have to establish metrics, and it has to be understandable to taxpayers.
That's a good point, yeah. I don't think I took it any other way. You know, and it's not only just credibility for all of you, but I'm the one that's going to go in and try to talk to legislative leaders, and I have to, make a valid argument on where I think we should go. Now, presidents all do the same thing, but so I have to have a board that I think, and a number that they are respectful of. So here's what I'm going to suggest, because we could go round and round on this. We're going to defer this because I want the university presidents to get us a capital number. I know what you want for 2015 for operating. Get a capital number. We'll have a special meeting, and we'll consider these options at a special meeting, because we have to do this fairly soon, I think, don't we, Al?
Yeah.
And I want to be able to get a number to the General Assembly. But let's figure out let's be able to plug in what you want for a capital. And get that to Al, and we'll figure it out, and then we'll call a special meeting. All right? Thanks, Niall.
Right. I'm up next, too.
All right, who's next? Stephanie?
Nope.
Nope.
No, you get rid of me quick.
What? Oh, you got some more?
Yeah.
Whoa.
There are two grant action items. The first one is for the Illinois Cooperative Work-Study Program. We've received and assessed applications, and the recommendation is for the distribution of $980,500 to 38 projects, which will serve a bit over we anticipate will serve over 1,000 students, so we request approval to proceed with those grant agreements.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. What else do you have, Niall?
And the Grow Your Own Teacher Education Initiative, we have put out the application process. The total amount for the year is $1,463,000, or $66,300. We have to subtract from that enough money to evaluate the program as required by law. We've gone through and we're trying to upgrade this program to the extent we can within the confines of a very restrictive law, and have made some changes in our application process. The applications are due the 5th of January, and we're asking so that the program can get started that you grant the executive director authority to enter into contract on an approved plan, which we would report back to you on at the next board meeting.
Move to approve as introduced.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just one item. The last time I recall this, and these numbers were in the media, in 2015 there was $20 million spent over the course of 10 years. At the time it was reported only 80 people were teaching, and that cost of about $250,000 a student.
Which is why this is a little bit delayed from what we might have thought. The program has been dark, essentially, pretty much dark for 2 years. And we've been trying to, Stephanie has been leading this to try to find ways to change it around, and we would make some more changes, which we think would provide even more results, but it's pretty restrictive. The law is really restrictive.
And yeah, that was kind of part of my questions. I know one, they don't have to repay loans if they were repaid scholarships.
Yes, if they work within the correct, confines. Yes.
But that's the law.
Yeah.
Right? The things that we can start kind of measuring and tracking to get to something more efficient than $250,000 a teacher.
Yes, the program has many good benefits and probably could be a lot better, but the law is very restrictive. It probably needs to be adjusted to meet its benefits.
It's trying to solve an important problem that needs solving, right? But if we can do it at a better price point within the confines or suggest changes,
yes.
Let's try to.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, did we take a vote on that? All right, so we had a motion, a second. Any more discussion? Any more questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
All right. Santos, good vote. Niall, you have anything else? You have
I
any
do
other
not. Now
budget
let's move
requests?
on to Stephanie.
How much money did we just spend with Grow Your Own?
1.466 million.
And what was the other one we spent?
980,000.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you.
Ready to go?
Yes. Mr. Chair, with the materials in your meeting packet, we've included a memo listing all pending academic programs and all authorization proposals submitted to the board through November 20th. Since then, no additional proposals have been received. As of December 7th, there were 3 new requests for program modifications added to the 42 reported in the memo. 6 applications have been withdrawn since the last board meeting. Item 5, Mr. Chair, requests approval of 7 associate degree programs, 15 baccalaureate programs, 2 graduate degree programs, and 5 operating authorities at 7 independent institutions. I now offer this item for your consideration.
You're quite the mover today. On motions. Second. All in favor, well, wait, any discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, anyone opposed? All right, good job, Stephanie.
Mr. Chair, item 6 requests approval of 2 baccalaureate degree programs and 1 graduate degree program at 3 public universities. I now offer this item for consideration.
What page are you on?
This is on page 175.
I apologize, it's clearly my fault, I just couldn't find it. I know everybody's read through these, so
Yeah.
I just want to, looking for my notes. All right, these pages aren't numbered. All right. Go ahead, any questions on this? Any motions on this?
I'll second.
All right. Anything else? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Agreeable board. All right, go to the next one, Stephanie.
Mr. Chair, item 7 requests adoption of amendments for dual credit courses, 23 Illinois Administrative Code 1009. I now offer this item for consideration.
This is 7.
So moved as introduced.
Do we have a second?
Dual credit, I'll second.
Yes.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Santos, can you hear us? All right.
I certainly can. I can hear you.
Good. All right, next one.
Mr. Chair, item 8 requests adoption of amendments for program review, private colleges and universities, 23 Illinois Administrative Code 1030. I now offer this item for consideration.
So moved.
Wait.
I have questions.
All right, hold on one second.
Okay. Having been a member of this committee that looked at these proposed amendments, I'm aware that we will delete the proposed amendment to allow the IBHE to seize and take possession of academic records when it appears that an institution, and I'm aware that we're doing that because the determination was made that there is no statutory authority. In looking at all of these, my question then and my question now is this. In the event that an institution loses operating authority, not necessarily voluntarily, but by revocation of operating authority, I don't see any provision in here for the IBHE to take possession and store those student records. And I raise that issue because that is a provision in the administrative rules of many organizations, because there are FERPA requirements and those records have to be maintained. And I know, you can require an institution to identify where it's going to keep those records. Sometimes they keep them independently, sometimes they send them to another institution. But I wonder why the IBHE, as the state agency, doesn't maintain possession of those records. There aren't that many institutions that actually lose operating authority. But I think we have better control of those records for students than institutions that go out of business and nobody knows what happens in the end.
I would offer that you are certainly correct. It is a rare occasion for an institution to close altogether. The Board of Higher Education does maintain student records for a very limited number of institutions that closed in the state's history and did not, as you indicated, make other arrangements for those records to be appropriately housed with a third party. So IBHE does currently have student records in the cases where an institution has closed and student records were not properly going to be maintained elsewhere.
Okay. So even though that's not included specifically within these rules, the IBHE itself has the authority to say, we will take possession
Yes.
of those records?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so did we
With
have?
that, I'll move, or I guess I'll second the
Motion,
motion.
second. Any more discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, Stephanie.
Mr. Chair, item 9 requests adoption of amendments for the approval of new units of instruction, research, and public service at public institutions, 23 Illinois Administrative Code 1050. I now offer this item for consideration.
Any questions? John, you want to make a motion? Second, Jane.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Good job, Stephanie. You're next, the next one.
Mr. Chair, item 10 requests adoption of amendments for private business and vocational schools, 23 Illinois Administrative Code 1095. I now offer this item for consideration.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Chris?
Sorry. On page 368 of the proposed rules, subsection 3, right at the top of the page, there is a provision that says, in the event it appears to the board that any such records of an institution discontinuing, that we can seize them without court order. That's the same provision that was just struck down in the other two. Is there a difference? Are we specifically authorized with respect to vocational schools where we're not specifically authorized with respect to private and public institutions?
Yes, the statute governing private business and vocational schools and our authorities specifically in that case grants IBHE the authority to seize records. The statute in the other cases does not.
Thank you very much.
All right, any other questions? Motion, John?
Second.
Hayes? Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next.
Mr. Chair, item 11 requests approval for the appointment of a hearing officer pertaining to the potential revocation of an institution's authorizations to operate and grant degrees.
All right, need a motion? Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Santos, are you a yes? All right.
I can hear you. I'm in favor.
All right, thank you. Stephanie's done. All right. Good job, Stephanie. Stephanie's doing a great job. Yep, she's great. Karen,
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you, Chairman Cross and board members. I have for you to consider the proposed rules for the data repository, shared data agreements, and fees. This is a proposed rule that upon your approval will start with the first notice and go through the JCAR process. This rule is put into place to acknowledge that IBHE is the data repository for the Illinois longitudinal data system. It also puts in the requirements for any shared data agreements that IBHE would enter into with parties that are requesting such data, and also puts in a fee schedule so that we can collect some of the costs of maintaining and providing the data to requesting parties.
Anyone have questions on this?
No, but I do have a comment, Mr. Chair. Hey, this is likely to be my last meeting, so, you know.
No, these are good. No, this is good. It's all, I think it's good myself. Go ahead.
I think, I looked at these rules. I really like these rules. I think they are very important because they respond to an issue we had with the Career Outcomes Tool. And that was, who controls the data? Was it IDES or IBHE? And it was an issue that Tom and I were actually a party to discussions with the governor's office, et cetera. And I think this is important because clearly that data is controlled by IBHE. My concern at the time was that whoever controls the data gets to manipulate the data, if you know what I'm talking about. And so I think these particular rules on especially with respect to the data repository, are really, really important. And I know, Mark, you had a hand in drafting them as well, so I think they're very well done. That's
Thank you.
editorial.
No, that's helpful. Anybody else? All right, how about a motion, John? Jane, a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, Karen, thank you, Karen. All right, we have some consent agenda action items, 13 through 22, and they range from things like minutes that we're approving, et cetera. Mark, you're comfortable with them? Okay, got a memo in the file. So I need a motion approving items V-13 through V-22. John, you're good with that. Second. We're going to have to share this a little bit. Bergman. Jay. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, Al, you want to talk about 2017 fall enrollments?
Absolutely. I want to thank Eric for putting together the fall enrollment survey, and just an editorial comment. Between 2014 and 2023, the U.S. is projected to produce fewer high school graduates, and 2017 was projected to be the lowest year. In Illinois, our 197 degree granting institutions in the state had a fall FTE of 569,000. The overall numbers reflect about a 2% decrease in FTE compared to last year. Community colleges also saw a decrease. It was slightly larger at community colleges. The decrease was 3.4%. And for public universities, the decrease in FTE was 2.2%. There were some institutions that saw significant increases. UIC had an 8% increase. Malcolm X College, also an 8% increase. Shawnee Community College and Lincoln Land both had significant increases in headcount enrollment. In the not-for-profit sector, National Louis and Resurrection both experienced double-digit growth in undergraduate enrollment, as did Lincoln College of Theology, Lincoln College of Technology, and American Intercontinental University in the for-profit sector. Overall, graduate enrollment is up slightly from fall of 2016. There is some variation across sectors. Graduate enrollment declined slightly at public universities and significantly at out-of-state institutions that are authorized to operate in the state of Illinois. Among the public universities, UIUC had fairly robust growth in graduate enrollment, while Chicago State, Governor State, and UIS had double-digit declines. So a mixed picture, but the downward trend unfortunately continues.
Any questions, observations, comments of Al?
I have a question. It doesn't directly relate to this report, but I hope it does sort of collaterally. Alice Marie Jacobs filed her report about the MEC meeting, and there was a portion in it about an exchange student program that between Illinois and other states. Are you familiar with that?
Stephanie, would you speak to that?
Okay, and there was if I understood the report, it said that last year, some 6,500 Illinois students took advantage of this exchange student program to go out of state.
Yes.
And that 0 out-of-state students came into an Illinois institution under the program. Is that correct? And if so,
It is
what's the backstory?
The Midwest Higher Education Compact, or MEC, offers a collaborative program where institutions and states can opt into opportunities to discount tuition for out-of-state students. IBHE Academic Affairs staff have been working with MEC staff over the last 6 to 9 months to address the particular metrics that MEC staff use in both portraying that program on their website as well as reporting participation. Both of those approaches in terms of describing the program and tracking participation, not through any purposeful effort, but they do inadvertently present the Illinois case in an unfavorable light. We have much greater student participation and opportunities for tuition discounting, for example, here in Illinois, than the MEC approach allows us to share. So that is an ongoing conversation with MEC and their staff to address changes in the program so that Illinois participation and opportunities for Illinois students are better portrayed and better documented.
So hopefully it doesn't really reflect
That is correct.
substantive reality.
Correct.
Good.
All right, anyone else? There is no report on closed institutions and teach-out locations. What? Oh, you have one more thing?
Mr. Chair, I just needed to note an update for the board on the report that begins on page 509 about closed institutions and those in teach-out. The report needs to reflect a correction in that ITT Technical Institute, noted on page 509, actually closed September 14th, 2016, not September 14th, 2017. So I note that correction for the board, and we will update board materials appropriately.
Any questions?
No.
Stephanie, thank you. All right. Illinois Transfer and Articulation Initiatives Annual Report. No presentation on that? That's a shame. Jamie, legislative report.
There was a handout given to the board that was a copy of a memo that Al and I discussed with the governor's office on our legislative initiatives. That obviously is subject to change based on the task force recommendations and anything else that the board deems would be useful for IBHE to pursue for a legislative agenda for next spring. The only thing I would ask at this time is if the board could give me a consensus. Within the Truth and Tuition, we had 3 different options that we were looking at. We looked at an institutional opt-in, we looked at a student opt-in, or we were looking at tying the Truth and Tuition to student progression, meaning they have to meet a minimum number of credit hours in order to retain the Truth and Tuition. So I need the advice of the board as to which way they want to go on this option so that I can relate that to the governor's office.
John?
My preference is based on credit hours. They maintain some semblance of full-time with the caveat of non-traditional
general gravity, center of gravity for higher ed policy, at least for publics, tends to be disadvantageous to that community to begin with. But I would be more inclined for, you know, you're a full-time student, let's keep you there versus somebody's doing 3 hours, you know, a semester for 15 years.
When you say student opt-in, you know, if a university has, let's just say $300 a credit hour. If a student opts in, and they say, all right, then $300 a credit hour for 4 years, and if they don't opt in, then they're saying that, I presume we're saying that the universities can increase their tuition over 4 years. Therefore, a student opt-in to me doesn't make sense. I think maybe a university opt-in, I mean, frankly, I just as soon see the bill eliminated altogether, but that's not one of the choices. But I would say a university opt-in, or I think it only, you know, I understand what you're saying, John, but I think it only covers 4 years anyway, regardless of whether it's full or part-time. So, you know, I think if we're going to do anything, we should make it a university opt-in, and they have to continue with a certain course load, maybe even, well, not a GPA, but, you know, I'd say university opt-in myself.
Where they have a student opt-in, they generally have a higher rate that they charge.
Well, if we were going to do that, and again, I was using the example of $300 an hour. If it was a question of, all right, you pay $300 an hour and you opt in, and you can do that for 4 years, or you pay $280 an hour, and you do not opt in, but you're subject to whatever increases there are. I mean, that would be a little bit different. But if you're going to start out at the same base, it's not a practical thing. But anyway, I think I'd be more interested in university opt-in combined with student success.
Yeah. Having served on Board of Trustees of a public university for 12 years, I understand the complexities of the mandate for the universities, and especially as we're now looking at the precariousness of funding going forward. So of the 3 choices, I certainly would support the university's option. I think also giving it to the student would be, I would think, would be an administrative debacle. So I'm not so much in favor of an individual one, trying to keep track of that, and you've got differences in payment of tuition. If our choices are such that it's the state or the university or the individual, I would go for the university.
Do you have enough input?
I think so, if everyone's consensus. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I did have one other thing for you to consider that's not on your list, but came up at a community college board meeting 2 weeks ago. They're going through a process of going through the Community College Act, and I brought up the same thing I brought up last meeting, that the Community College Board approves academic programs for community colleges, then they come here for the same approval. It strikes me as a simple change, but it's a change to the Board of Higher Education Act to remove having 2 different bodies give the same approval. If that's something that you'd like to consider, right? We can discuss it if you like, but take a look at if that's something that's viable. Having the community colleges just approve those instead of having 2 different bodies render the same. Makes sense.
That would probably take a change in legislation.
No, it would,
And
right?
it's not even, it's a different subject.
All right, anything else? Okay. Jamie, thank you. Thanks for all the work you do. Thanks to all of you back there. Arthur, thank you. Everyone else, I think, is up there. Eric, you were busy earlier with the president. So we have a finalized 2018 calendar that you should have. We're going to be in Quincy in March, but we'll have, as I said, we're going to figure out a special session. Not sure where we'll do that. There's I think in your packet, the BJ's report on city colleges. No need to reiterate or go over that. Public comment. Maurice Donovan wanted to speak, but she had some car trouble, so she's not there. And on other business, we're going to go to a special session. What do we need to do? Closed session. Closed session.
Motion under 2C1 of the Buildings Act.
This won't take long, I don't think. John, you want to make that motion?
I can, but was it on the agenda? Can we do
You
that?
can always go into closed session.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right, fair enough. Then I move to go into closed session pursuant to.
Always do that. You don't have to
what was,
post it.
2C1.
2C1.
Who wants to second it?
Second.
We need to do a roll call vote.
What is 2C1?
Personnel.
Personnel.
Dominic?
Aye.
Bergman?
Aye.
Coffee?
Aye.
Ross?
Here, yes.
Eagle?
Yes.
Gossett?
Yes.
Days?
Yes.
Muir?
Yes.
Rivera?
Yes.
Rossetti?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Weissman?
Yes.
Zarnikov?
He's telling you.
Public doesn't have to leave the room. Check that.